The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as the emergency transmission crackled through the quantum communicators. Ambassador Zethkree's four eyes widened in horror as the desperate plea echoed across the vast assembly hall, where representatives from over 200 civilized species had gathered for what was supposed to be a routine trade negotiation. "This is Captain Veltar of the cargo vessel Peaceful Current," the voice transmitted through universal translators, each word heavy with fear. "We are under attack by the Void Hunters. Our shields are failing. Our escorts are destroyed. We carry 3 million refugees from the Kepler colony massacre. Please, anyone who receives this message, we are at coordinates 77 Alpha in the neutral zone. We cannot fight them. We need help. We need—" The transmission cut to static. The silence that followed was deafening. Ambassador Zethkree felt his breathing apparatus flutter rapidly as panic set in. Around the chamber, delegates began whispering frantically in their native languages, creating a symphony of fear and desperation that filled the air like poisonous gas. The Void Hunters, even speaking their names, sent chills through the assembled representatives. They were the nightmare that haunted every civilized species in the galaxy, a race of parasitic beings that consumed entire worlds, leaving nothing but dead space in their wake. Their ships were organic monstrosities that could heal from damage and adapt to any weapon used against them. They showed no mercy, took no prisoners, and left no survivors. Fleet Admiral Korthak of the Hegemony Navy stood slowly, his massive reptilian frame casting shadows across the chamber floor. "The coordinates placed them deep in contested space," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of military authority. "My fleet could reach them in 18 hours at maximum burn." 18 hours, squeaked Ambassador Piplin, her small mammalian features contorted with distress. "The Peaceful Current doesn't have 18 minutes against a Void Hunter pack. What would you have us do?" Admiral Korthak's scales shifted to a darker shade, indicating his growing agitation. "Risk our finest ships and cruise in a futile rescue attempt? The Void Hunters hunt in packs of 12 to 20 vessels. Even my dreadnoughts would be overwhelmed." Commander THYSS of the Avian Confederacy spread her massive wings in a gesture of frustration. "Our combined fleets number in the thousands. Surely we can mount some kind of response." "You speak foolishness," interjected Chancellor Mordun of the Silicon Collective, his crystalline body pulsing with angry red light. "The Void Hunters' adaptive technology makes them nearly invincible in open combat. Every engagement we've had with them has ended in catastrophic losses. The last time the Hegemony tried to face them directly, they lost 47 ships and gained nothing but the satisfaction of watching their weapons become useless after the first few volleys." The debate continued for precious minutes as the reality of their helplessness settled over the assembly like a shroud. The cargo ship and its 3 million refugees were doomed, and everyone in the chamber knew it. This was simply how things worked in their galaxy. When the Void Hunters came, civilized beings ran or died. There was no third option. Ambassador Zethkree found himself thinking about the children aboard that cargo ship. 3 million refugees, the transmission had said. How many of them were young ones who had already survived one massacre, only to face another in the cold emptiness of space? His own species had evolved from prey animals, and every instinct in his body screamed at him to find a solution, any solution. "What about the Deathworlders?" he said quietly. The chamber fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of defeat, it was the silence of a terrible idea being contemplated. "You cannot be serious," Admiral Korthak said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The humans have ships," Zethkree continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "Their fleet is substantial. Their technology is unusual. Their technology is insane," corrected Dr. Felnara of the Science Directorate. "They build ships without proper safety protocols. They use weapons that are as dangerous to the user as to the target. They engage in combat tactics that no rational being would consider. Because they're not rational," added Chancellor Mordun. "They come from a Class 12 death world. They evolved alongside predators that could kill them in dozens of different ways. Their entire species is mentally unstable by any civilized standard." Ambassador Zethkree had heard these arguments before. Humanity had been discovered only 50 years ago, and their integration into galactic society had been problematic. They were the first species ever encountered that had evolved on a planet classified as uninhabitable by galactic standards. Earth was a nightmare world of extreme weather, deadly radiation, poisonous atmosphere, and predators that could kill with remarkable efficiency. The humans themselves were just as terrifying as their homeworld. They had no natural armor, no claws, no poisonous stingers or protective shells. They couldn't fly, couldn't see in the dark, couldn't breathe underwater for extended periods. By all rights, they should have been helpless prey animals. Instead, they had become the apex predators of their planet. They hunted for sport. They consumed toxins for pleasure. They engaged in physical combat as entertainment. They regularly risked their lives for concepts like fun and adventure. They had somehow developed pack-bonding instincts so strong that they would adopt members of other species as family and fight to the death to protect them. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to enjoy fighting impossible odds. The more dangerous a situation became, the more determined they grew to overcome it. The humans have faced void hunters before, Zethkree pointed out. 3 months ago, when the hunters attacked the mining station at Proxima 7, the human ship Indomitable engaged them. And barely escaped with their lives, Admiral Korthak added quickly. They lost half their crew, and their ship was nearly destroyed. But they survived, Zethkree emphasized. They engaged a void hunter vessel in single combat, and lived to tell about it. When was the last time any of our ships could make that claim? The uncomfortable truth hung in the air like a toxic cloud. No one could remember the last time any civilized species had survived a direct engagement with the void hunters. The standard protocol was to run and pray they weren't being pursued. Commander THYSS folded her wings tightly against her body, a sign of deep contemplation among her species. The humans maintain a military outpost in the Centauri system, she said slowly. Their response time to the coordinates would be 14 hours. 4 hours faster than our nearest fleet, observed Dr. Felnara. This is madness, Admiral Korthak protested. Even if we could convince the humans to respond, which is unlikely given their current diplomatic status, we would be sending them to their deaths. The political ramifications alone would be catastrophic. Zethkree's breathing apparatus fluttered again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from a growing sense of desperate hope. What if they're not going to their deaths? What if they actually stand a chance? On what possible basis could you make that assumption? Chancellor Mordun demanded, his crystalline form now pulsing with agitated orange light. Because they're insane enough to try, Zethkree replied simply. The logic was undeniable, even if it was terrifying to contemplate. Every other species in the galaxy had developed their military doctrine around the fundamental principle of survival. Ships were designed to be safe, weapons were tested extensively before deployment, and tactics emphasized minimal casualties and strategic withdrawal when faced with superior forces. Human military doctrine was the complete opposite. Their ships were designed to fight. Their weapons were built to cause maximum damage regardless of the risk to the user, and their tactics seemed to revolve around the concept of never giving up, no matter how hopeless the situation became. I need to make a transmission, Zethkree announced, standing abruptly from his delegation seat. Ambassador, please reconsider, Admiral Korthak pleaded. If this goes wrong, if we do nothing, 3 million innocents die, Zethkree interrupted. If we send the humans and they fail, 3 million innocents die, and we lose a few ships full of Deathworlders. If we send the humans and they somehow succeed. He paused, letting the possibility hang in the air. Maybe for once, the Void Hunters learned that they're not the only predators in this galaxy. The vote was closer than anyone expected. In the end, desperation won over caution by a margin of just 12 votes. The decision was made to contact the human military outpost at Centauri and request immediate assistance. As Zethkree prepared the transmission, his hands trembling slightly as he operated the quantum communicator, he wondered if he was about to save 3 million lives or doom an entire species. The humans had never faced more than a single Void Hunter vessel. According to their scouts, the pack attacking the peaceful current numbered at least 15 ships. But then, again, no one had ever accused humans of being reasonable. The transmission connected, and a human face appeared on the screen. The creature looked even more unsettling than Zethkree remembered. Smooth skin instead of protective scales, small eyes that somehow seemed to see everything, and those disturbing white bone structures they used for eating visible as the human smiled. "This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Defense Fleet," the human said, her voice carrying an odd combination of warmth and underlying menace. "How can we help you today, Ambassador?" Zethkree took a deep breath and began to explain the situation. As he spoke, he watched the human's face carefully. He had studied their species extensively, and he knew that humans were capable of remarkable emotional control when necessary. Admiral Chun listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as he provided details about the Void Hunter pack size and the refugees' situation. When he finished, there was a moment of silence that seemed to stretch for eternity. 15 Void Hunter vessels," Admiral Chun said finally, her voice thoughtful. 3 million refugees. Cargo ship with minimal defensive capabilities. She paused again, and Zethkree found himself holding his breath. "What's the crew complement on a typical Void Hunter ship?" The question caught him off guard. Approximately 800 to 1,000, depending on their adaptation stage. "Admiral, I should point out that these beings are highly dangerous. They've destroyed every fleet that has engaged them in direct combat." Admiral Chin's smile widened slightly, revealing more of those unsettling white structures. 800 each, 15 ships. So we're looking at roughly 12,000 hostiles, give or take. She seemed to be doing calculations in her head. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Ambassador. The Terran Defense Fleet will respond immediately." "Admiral, please understand," Zethkree said quickly, "we're not ordering you to engage. We're simply requesting assistance if you feel it's tactically feasible. We understand if you determine the situation is too dangerous to." "Too dangerous?" Admiral Chun interrupted, and for a moment Zethkree saw something flash behind her eyes that reminded him why humans were classified as apex predators. "Ambassador, someone just threatened to hurt 3 million refugees. In human military doctrine, that's not too dangerous. That's target practice." The transmission ended, leaving Zethkree staring at a blank screen. Around him, the council chamber had fallen silent again as delegates absorbed what they had just witnessed. "Did she just say target practice?" squeaked Ambassador Piplin. "I believe she did," replied Commander HFY, her feathers rustling with what might have been anticipation or terror. "What have we done?" Admiral Korthak whispered. Zethkree didn't answer. He was too busy wondering if they had just saved 3 million lives or unleashed something that the galaxy wasn't ready to see. In the Centauri system, alarms were already sounding as the human fleet began its emergency deployment. 12 ships of the Terran Defense Fleet powered up their engines and began accelerating toward the coordinates provided by the Galactic Council. Their flagship, the Retribution, was a kilometer-long monster of human engineering that violated every principle of safe starship design. Its armor was too thick, its weapons were too powerful, and its engine output was considered dangerously excessive by galactic standards. Admiral Chin stood on the bridge, watching her crew prepare for what she knew would be either humanity's greatest victory or most spectacular defeat. Either way, it was going to be interesting. "Ma'am," her tactical officer reported, "we have full fleet readiness. All ships report ready for quantum jump." "Excellent," Chin replied, settling into her command chair. "Signal the fleet. Message is as follows: ladies and gentlemen, we have 12,000 hostiles threatening 3 million refugees. Today, we show these parasites what happens when you mess with innocents in our neighborhood." As the human fleet entered quantum space, racing toward what would become the most pivotal battle in galactic history, none of them knew that their actions would forever change how the galaxy viewed both the Void Hunters and the species from the little death world called Earth. The refugees aboard the peaceful Current continued to send their desperate transmissions into the void, unaware that help was coming from the most unlikely source imaginable. Help was coming from the Deathworlders. And the Void Hunters were about to learn that there were worse things in the galaxy than themselves. Aptine Veltar pressed his 4 hands against the command console of the peaceful Current, watching helplessly as another section of his ship's hull buckled under the Void Hunters' assault. The cargo vessel shuddered violently, throwing several of his bridge crew against the walls despite their restraining harnesses. Engineering reports we've lost 3 more power conduits, his first officer announced, her voice barely audible over the screaming of damaged systems. Life support is down to 60% efficiency. Through the main viewport, Veltar could see the nightmare that had been stalking them for the past 4 hours. 15 Void Hunter vessels moved through space like living shadows, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed designed to inspire terror in anyone who saw them. Each ship was roughly the size of a military cruiser, but their irregular, constantly shifting shapes made them appear larger and more menacing. The lead hunter vessel looked like something that had crawled out of a planet's deepest ocean trench. Its hull was covered in what appeared to be scales that could open and close like breathing gills, and tentacle-like appendages sprouted from its sides, each one tipped with weapons that fired streams of corrosive energy. When it moved, it didn't simply travel through space. It seemed to swim through it, as if the vacuum itself was just another ocean for it to navigate. Status on the refugees? Veltar asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Cargo bays 7 through 12 are showing increased stress fractures, his chief engineer reported through the communicator. We've had to reduce life support to those sections by another 10% to maintain power to the engines. The refugees they're scared, Captain. Some of the younglings have stopped eating. Veltar closed his eyes and tried to push away the image of 3 million terrified beings huddled in his ship's cargo holds. They had already survived the massacre at Kepler Colony, watching their homeworld burn as the Void Hunters consumed everything they had ever known. Now they were trapped aboard a ship that was slowly being torn apart by the same monsters that had destroyed their lives once before. "Sir," his communications officer called out, her voice cutting through his dark thoughts. "I'm detecting another transmission attempt from the Void Hunters." "Ignore it," Veltar ordered immediately. "You know what they'll offer." He had already heard their demands 3 times in the past hour. The Void Hunters were willing to let the cargo ship go, but only if he surrendered half the refugees to them. They needed fresh genetic material, they claimed, to improve their adaptation matrices. They spoke of the refugees as if they were simply resources to be harvested, discussing which species would provide the most useful biological components for their ship's living systems. The thought of condemning 1.5 million innocents to that fate made Veltar's stomach churn with revulsion. The Void Hunters didn't simply kill their victims. They integrated them into their ships, turning living beings into components of their vessel's biological systems. Prisoners became living computers, their minds trapped in eternal service to their captor's war machine. "Captain," his sensor operator announced, "the Hunter Pack is moving into a new formation. It looks like they're preparing for a final assault." Veltar looked at his displays and felt his heart sink further. The Void Hunters had been playing with them for hours, systematically wearing down their shields and weapons while studying their ship's defenses. They could have destroyed the peaceful current at any time, but they preferred to let their prey suffer before delivering the final blow. "How long until our shields fail completely?" "At current rate of decay, maybe 20 minutes, his engineer replied. "Less if they increase their attack intensity." 20 minutes. Veltar thought about the transmission he had sent to the Galactic Council hours ago. Even if someone had received it and decided to respond, help couldn't possibly arrive in time. The nearest military fleet was at least 15 hours away, and that was assuming they were willing to risk their ships against the Void Hunters in the first place. "Sir," his communications officer said again, but this time her voice carried a note of confusion rather than fear. "I'm picking up a transmission on the emergency frequency. It's not from the Galactic Council." "Who then?" "The signal is identifying as Terran Defense Fleet," she replied, her voice growing more puzzled with each word. "Admiral Sarah Chun commanding. They're requesting our current status and tactical situation." Veltar felt his breathing apparatus flutter with surprise. The humans? The Deathworlders from the infamous Class 12 planet were responding to his distress call? He had heard stories about their species. Of course, everyone in the galaxy had. They were the beings who had somehow evolved intelligence on a world that should have killed them 1,000 times over. They built ships that violated safety protocols and engaged in combat tactics that bordered on suicidal. More importantly, they were the only species in recorded history that had ever survived direct combat with a Void Hunter vessel. "Put them through," he ordered. The main screen flickered and then displayed a human face. Veltar had seen humans before, but he still found their appearance unsettling. They had no natural armor, no protective scales or shells, just smooth skin that looked impossibly vulnerable. Their eyes were small compared to most species, yet they seemed to see everything with disturbing clarity. And those white bone structures they used for eating were currently visible as the human smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both reassuring and terrifying. "Captain Veltar," Admiral Chen said, her voice carrying through the universal translator with remarkable calmness. "We received your distress call. What's your current situation?" "Admiral," Veltar replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "We are under attack by 15 Void Hunter vessels. Our shields are failing, and we have 3 million refugees aboard. Our weapons are insufficient to damage their adaptive hulls, and we estimate 20 minutes until total shield collapse." Admiral Chen nodded as if he had just described a minor traffic obstruction rather than a death sentence. "Understood. What's your cargo capacity and refugee distribution?" The question seemed oddly specific, but Veltar answered anyway. "We have 40 cargo bays, each holding approximately 75,000 beings. Mixed species, mostly civilians from the Kepler colony evacuation. Any military personnel among the refugees?" "A few hundred," Veltar admitted. "Mostly security forces and engineers who survived the initial assault." "Excellent," Admiral Chen said, and her smile widened slightly. "Captain, I need you to listen very carefully. In approximately 8 minutes, you're going to see something that may seem impossible. I need you to maintain course and heading exactly as you are now, and under no circumstances should you attempt to maneuver when the shooting starts." "Admiral, with respect," Veltar said carefully, "you should know that these are Void Hunters. Their adaptive technology makes them nearly invincible in conventional combat. They've destroyed every fleet that has ever engaged them." Admiral Chen's expression changed subtly, and for a moment Veltar saw something in her eyes that reminded him why humans were classified as apex predators. "Captain, they've never fought humans before. We have a saying in our military: everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Today, we're going to show these parasites what a real predator looks like." The transmission ended, leaving Veltar staring at a blank screen. Around his bridge, the crew exchanged uncertain glances. The humans were actually coming to help, but was it a rescue mission or a suicide charge? "Sir," his sensor operator called out urgently, "I'm detecting quantum wake signatures. Multiple contacts emerging from quantum space, bearing 27 Mark IV. "How many?" Veltar asked, though he was afraid of the answer. 12 ships, sir. All showing Terran Defense Fleet identification codes. 12 ships. Against 15 Void Hunter vessels. Veltar wasn't sure whether to feel grateful or horrified that the humans were about to die, trying to save his refugees. The human fleet emerged from quantum space in perfect formation, and Veltar got his first look at Deathworlder military engineering. The ships were unlike anything he had ever seen. Where galactic vessels were designed with smooth, efficient curves and redundant safety systems, the human ships looked like they had been built for war and nothing else. The flagship, which his computers identified as the Retribution, was a massive dreadnought that seemed to violate several fundamental principles of starship design. Its armor was ridiculously thick, its weapon arrays were absurdly oversized, and its engine emissions were so powerful that they registered as potential navigation hazards. The ship looked less like a vessel, and more like a weapon that had been given the ability to travel through space. The other 11 ships were similarly intimidating. They moved with predatory grace, maintaining formation while angling toward the Void Hunter pack like a school of mechanical sharks sensing blood in the water. "This is Admiral Chun to all ships," came a transmission on an open frequency that both fleets could monitor. "We have 15 hostiles threatening a refugee ship with 3 million civilians aboard. Today we show these parasites what happens when you threaten innocents in our neighborhood. All ships, weapons free. Hunt them down." The response from the human fleet was immediate and unanimous. "Acknowledged, Admiral." "Happy hunting." Veltar watched in fascination and terror as the human ships accelerated toward the Void Hunter pack. He had studied military tactics as part of his merchant captain training, and By every principle he knew, the humans were about to commit suicide. They were outnumbered, they were fighting in enemy-held territory, and they were facing an opponent that had never been defeated in direct combat. The lead Void Hunter vessel, apparently surprised by the sudden appearance of new enemies, turned its attention from the peaceful current to the approaching human fleet. It fired its first salvo of corrosive energy beams, the same weapons that had been slowly eating away at Veltar's shields for hours. The beams struck the Retribution dead center, and absolutely nothing happened. The energy weapons that had been tearing apart the cargo ship's shields didn't even scratch the human dreadnought's armor. The corrosive energy simply splashed across the hull like water hitting stone, dissipating harmlessly into space. "Impossible," Veltar whispered. "Sir," his sensor operator announced, his voice filled with awe. The human flagship just shrugged off a direct hit from Void Hunter primary weapons. Their armor isn't even showing scorch marks. The Void Hunter vessel fired again, this time concentrating its entire weapon array on a single point on the Retribution's hull. The result was the same. The energy beams had no effect whatsoever. "This is Retribution to Hunter Fleet." Admiral Chen's voice came over the open frequency, her tone conversational despite the fact that her ship was under heavy fire. "Your weapons are impressive against civilized ships. Unfortunately for you, we're not civilized." What happened next would be remembered in galactic military histories as the moment everything changed. The Retribution returned fire. The human ship's main guns were massive kinetic accelerators that fired projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. When the first salvo struck the lead Void Hunter vessel, the organic ship's adaptive hull tried to reconfigure itself to absorb the impact. It failed spectacularly. The kinetic projectiles punched through the Void Hunter's hull like paper, creating massive holes that began venting atmosphere and biological fluids into space. The ship's organic systems, designed to adapt to energy weapons, had no defense against simple, overwhelming kinetic force. "Direct hit," the human tactical officer's voice echoed across the open frequency. "Hunter 1 is showing massive hull breaches. Their adaptive systems can't compensate for kinetic penetration." The other Void Hunter vessels immediately changed tactics, spreading out and attempting to surround the human fleet. Their organic hulls began shifting, trying to develop some kind of defense against the kinetic weapons. They didn't get the chance. The 11 smaller human ships opened fire simultaneously, their weapons filling space with a storm of kinetic projectiles, plasma bolts, and something that Veltar's sensors couldn't even identify. The Void Hunters found themselves caught in a crossfire that came from every direction at once. "This is impossible," Veltar repeated, watching his sensors as 3 Void Hunter vessels took critical damage in the first 30 seconds of the engagement. "They're supposed to be invincible." "Captain," his communications officer called out, "I'm receiving a transmission from the human fleet. Admiral Chen is asking for a private channel. Put her through." Admiral Chen's face appeared on his screen again, but this time she was clearly in combat mode. Her ship was shaking slightly from weapon impacts, and he could hear the background noise of a military vessel in battle. "Captain Veltar," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. "We're going to clear you a path to escape. In 60 seconds, I want you to begin maximum acceleration toward the quantum jump coordinates my navigation officer is transmitting to you now. Do not deviate from the course, and do not stop to help if any of our ships get into trouble. Your only job is to get those refugees to safety. Admiral, what about your fleet? Can you defeat them?" Admiral Chen smiled again, and this time Veltar definitely saw the predator lurking behind her eyes. "Captain, these parasites have been terrorizing civilized species for centuries because no one has ever fought back properly. They're used to facing prey. Today, they're facing predators. We'll be fine." As if to punctuate her words, another Void Hunter vessel exploded in the background of the transmission, its organic hull unable to withstand the sustained barrage from the human weapons. "Beginning escape run in 60 seconds, Veltar acknowledged. "Good hunting, Captain," Admiral Chen said, and the transmission ended. Veltar turned to his crew, who were all staring at their sensors in disbelief as the human fleet systematically dismantled the Void Hunter pack. "You heard her," he announced. "Prepare for maximum acceleration. We're getting our passengers to safety." As the peaceful current began its escape run, Veltar took one last look at the battle raging behind them. 6 Void Hunter vessels were already destroyed or disabled, and the remaining 9 were fleeing in different directions as the human fleet pursued them with relentless efficiency. For the first time in galactic history, the Void Hunters were the ones running for their lives. The refugees were going to survive, and the galaxy would never be the same. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching her tactical displays as the human fleet systematically hunted down the fleeing Void Hunter vessels. What had started as a desperate rescue mission was rapidly turning into a masterclass in human military doctrine. Hunter 7 is attempting to escape toward the asteroid field, her tactical officer reported. Should we pursue? Negative, Chun replied calmly. Let the Prometheus and Defiance handle that one. I want our main guns focused on the cluster, trying to regroup near the gas giant. The battle had been raging for 20 minutes, and the results were beyond anything Chun had hoped for. Of the original 15 Void Hunter vessels, 8 were completely destroyed, 4 were disabled and drifting, and only 3 were still capable of meaningful resistance. The human fleet had taken some damage. The Vigilant had lost 2 weapon arrays, and the Sentinel was showing stress fractures along her port hull, but no ships had been lost. More importantly, the peaceful current was safely away, its 3 million refugees now speeding toward Galactic Council space under the protection of an automated distress beacon that would ensure immediate assistance from any patrol vessels they encountered. Ma'am, her communications officer announced, we're receiving multiple transmissions from the retreating Void Hunters. They appear to be attempting some kind of communication. Let's hear it, Chen ordered. The bridge speakers crackled with what sounded like a mixture of organic sounds and electronic noise. The universal translator struggled for several seconds before managing to produce recognizable speech. Unknown predators. The voice was harsh and alien, filled with harmonics that suggested multiple beings speaking simultaneously. We acknowledge your strength. Cease your pursuit, and we will withdraw from this sector. Chen raised an eyebrow. In over 2 centuries of galactic contact, no one had ever recorded a Void Hunter attempting to negotiate. They were known for their absolute refusal to communicate with their prey, speaking only to demand surrender or issue threats. This is Admiral Chun of the Terran Defense Fleet, she replied. You attacked a refugee ship carrying civilian evacuees. Your request for mercy is denied. The response was immediate and filled with what could only be described as confusion. Mercy? We do not request mercy. We propose tactical withdrawal to avoid further losses. Counterproposal, Chen said, her voice taking on a harder edge. Surrender now, and you'll be processed according to galactic law. Continue to resist, and we'll demonstrate why humans are considered apex predators. The silence that followed lasted nearly 30 seconds. When the Void Hunters finally responded, there was something in their collective voice that Chun had never heard before in any recording of their communications. Fear. You are from the Death World, they said. You are the ones who cannot be adapted. Chun felt a chill run down her spine. Explain that statement. We have observed your species for 3 cycles, the voice continued. Your biological patterns cannot be integrated into our systems. Your neural architecture resists symbiosis. Your genetic material causes cascade failures in our adaptive matrices. You are incompatible with our evolution. The implications hit Chun like a physical blow. The Void Hunters hadn't simply been avoiding human space out of respect for territorial boundaries. They had been deliberately staying away from humanity because humans were somehow toxic to their entire biological system. Commander Morrison, she called to her science officer. Are you getting this? Recording everything, Admiral. The woman replied, her voice tight with excitement. If this is accurate, it explains why they've never attempted to attack human colonies or ships. We might be naturally immune to their assimilation techniques. Chen turned back to the communication system. Unknown vessels, you will surrender immediately or face destruction. You have 30 seconds to comply. We cannot surrender to Deathworlders, came the reply. Your existence is contradiction to our purpose. We will withdraw and report your presence to the Deep Hunters. This sector will be marked as forbidden to our kind. Deep Hunters? Chen asked, but the transmission had already ended. Admiral, Her tactical officer called out urgently. The 3 remaining hostile vessels are powering up what looks like emergency quantum drives. They're preparing to jump. Chun watched her displays as the Void Hunter ships began generating the energy patterns associated with emergency quantum jumps. It was a dangerous maneuver under normal circumstances, and attempting it while under fire was nearly suicidal. The fact that they were willing to risk it rather than face capture spoke volumes about how much they feared human capabilities. "Let them go," she ordered, surprising her bridge crew. "Ma'am?" her executive officer questioned. "We've accomplished our mission," Chen explained. "The refugees are safe. We've demonstrated that the Void Hunters can be defeated, and we've gathered intelligence that could change everything about how the galaxy deals with these parasites." She paused, watching as the alien vessels disappeared into quantum space. "Besides, I want them to spread the word about what happened here today." As the last Void Hunter vessel vanished, Chen's fleet began the process of cataloging their victory. The battlefield was littered with the remains of organic ships, their hull fragments continuing to dissolve in space as their biological systems shut down without central control. "Science teams to the disabled vessels," Chen ordered. "Full biosecurity protocols. I want samples of everything. Hull materials, weapon systems, propulsion technology, anything that might help us understand how these things work." "Admiral," her communications officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. Ambassador Zeth Kree is requesting a full status report." Chen settled into her command chair, suddenly, feeling the weight of what her fleet had just accomplished. They hadn't simply won a battle. They had potentially shifted the balance of power in the galaxy. "Put him through." Ambassador Zeth Kree's face appeared on the main screen, his 4 eyes wide with what appeared to be a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Admiral Chun," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "please tell me the refugees are safe." "All 3 million refugees are secure and en route to Council space," Chun replied. "The peaceful current suffered minor damage, but is fully operational." "And the Void Hunters?" Chun allowed herself a small smile. 8 destroyed, for disabled, and, under investigation, 3 escaped after attempting to negotiate a withdrawal. The silence that followed was so complete that Chen wondered if the transmission had been lost. Finally, Ambassador Zeth Kree found his voice. "They attempted to negotiate," he whispered. "In over 600 years of recorded contact, Void Hunters have never attempted to negotiate with any species. Apparently, we're a special case," Chen said. "They claim our biological patterns can't be adapted to their systems. We might be naturally immune to whatever process they use to assimilate other species." "This is—" Zeth Kree paused, clearly struggling to process the implications. "Admiral, do you understand what this means? If humans can fight the Void Hunters effectively, if you're immune to their primary weapons, this changes everything." Chen nodded slowly. She was beginning to understand the full scope of what had happened. For centuries, the Void Hunters had terrorized the galaxy because no one could stand against them. Their adaptive technology made them nearly invincible, and their bioassimilation capabilities meant that even defeating them often came at the cost of losing entire crews to their horror. But humans, it seemed, were different. They were the antibodies the galaxy had been waiting for. "Ambassador," Chen said carefully, "I think we need to have a much longer conversation about galactic defense strategy. But first, I need to get my people home and file a complete report with Terran Command." "Of course," Zeth Kree agreed quickly. "The Council will be very interested in discussing a formal alliance with your species. This victory, Admiral, you've given us hope for the first time in centuries." As the transmission ended, Chun turned to her executive officer. "XO, signal the fleet. We're heading home. And send a priority transmission to Terran Command. We need to brief them on everything that happened here before the galaxy decides to make us their permanent Void Hunter extermination service." Commander Sarah Martinez nodded. "Already on it, Admiral. Though I have a feeling that's exactly what's going to happen anyway." Chen had to admit her XO was probably right. Humanity had just demonstrated that they could do something no other species in the galaxy had ever managed. They could fight the Void Hunters and win. The political and military implications were staggering. "Ma'am," her science officer called out, "you should see this. We're getting preliminary data from the disabled Void Hunter vessels." Chen walked over to the science station, where Commander Morrison was analyzing the readings from their sensor probes. "What are we looking at?" Chen asked. "The Void Hunter biotechnology is unlike anything in our databases," Morrison explained, gesturing to her displays. "Their ships aren't just organic. They're essentially giant living creatures that have been modified for space travel and combat. The crews don't pilot them so much as form a symbiotic relationship with them." "Interesting. What else?" "The weapons systems are fascinating," Morrison continued. "They don't generate energy beams. They literally grow directed energy organs that project various forms of biological warfare. Acid sprays, neural disruptors, cellular decomposition fields. It's all designed to break down organic targets for assimilation." Chen studied the data, beginning to understand why traditional galactic military forces had been so ineffective against the Void Hunters. Their entire combat doctrine is built around fighting other organic species, she realized. They're designed to capture and convert, not to destroy. "Exactly," Morrison agreed. "But our kinetic weapons don't care about biological adaptation. A chunk of metal traveling at relativistic speeds is still a chunk of metal traveling at relativistic speeds, regardless of how fancy your bioarmor is. And our ship designs? Pure mechanical engineering with minimal organic components," Morrison said, warming to her subject. "Our crew quarters, our computer systems, even our life support. It's all technology-based rather than bio-based. From their perspective, we're probably like fighting machines rather than living beings." Chen nodded thoughtfully. Humanity's approach to space travel and warfare was fundamentally different from every other species in the galaxy. While other races had developed bio-integrated technologies that worked in harmony with their natural biology, humans had created purely artificial systems that extended their capabilities without changing their essential nature. It was the difference between adaptation and domination. Other species adapted their technology to work with their biology. Humans forced their technology to serve their will, regardless of biological limitations. "There's something else, Admiral," Morrison added, her voice dropping to a more serious tone. "The quantum signatures from their ships are pointing toward a specific region of space. Based on their emission patterns, I think we can triangulate their home territory." Chen felt her pulse quicken. "How confident are you in that analysis?" 70%, maybe 75%, Morrison replied. "But, Admiral, that territory it's huge. We're talking about a region of space larger than the entire Galactic Council's jurisdiction. If that's their home territory, then what we fought today was just a tiny scouting force." The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. 15 Void Hunter vessels had been enough to terrorize entire sectors of space. If they represented just a small fraction of the total Void Hunter population, how many ships are we potentially looking at? Chen asked quietly. Morrison checked her calculations again. Conservative estimate? Thousands. More likely tens of thousands. Possibly hundreds of thousands. Chen stared at the tactical display, where the remains of 8 Void Hunter vessels continued to drift through space. Her fleet had won a decisive victory, but they had just learned that they were facing an enemy of truly staggering size. "XO," she called out. "Add an addendum to that priority transmission. Tell Terran Command that we're going to need a much bigger fleet." As the human fleet began its journey home, none of them realized that their victory had done more than save 3 million refugees. They had announced humanity's presence to an enemy that had ruled the galaxy through fear for centuries. And that enemy was now very interested in learning more about the species from the little death world that had dared to fight back. In the deep regions of space, ancient biomechanical constructs began receiving reports of the engagement. For the first time in their collective memory, a Void Hunter pack had been defeated by an inferior force. For the first time in their history, their victims had proven immune to assimilation. The Deep Hunters stirred in their vast hive ships and began to plan their response to this unprecedented threat. The galaxy was about to learn that the Void Hunters they had feared for so long were merely the scouting forces of something much, much worse. But they were also about to learn that humans had a saying about such situations: bring it on. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 72 hours after Admiral Chen's fleet returned to human space, and the atmosphere in the Great Chamber was unlike anything Ambassador Zeth Kree had ever experienced. Representatives from over 300 species packed the assembly hall, their voices creating a cacophony of excitement, fear, and desperate hope that echoed off the crystalline walls. For the first time in galactic history, someone had not merely survived an encounter with the Void Hunters, they had devastated them. Order! Order! Chancellor Mordun called out, his crystalline form pulsing with agitated orange light as he tried to restore some semblance of control to the proceedings. We will hear the full report from Ambassador Zethkree before opening the floor to discussion. Zethkree stood slowly, his four eyes scanning the assembled delegates as silence gradually fell over the chamber. He had spent the past 3 days reviewing every piece of data from the human engagement, and the implications still left him feeling dizzy. Honored representatives, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. I can confirm that the human fleet designated as Terran Defense Force responded to our request for assistance in the refugee crisis. At 14:30 Galactic Standard Time, 12 human vessels engaged 15 Void Hunter ships in direct combat. He paused, watching as delegates leaned forward in their seats. The next words would change everything. The humans achieved complete victory. 8 Void Hunter vessels were destroyed, 4 were disabled and captured for analysis, and 3 escaped the engagement zone. The refugee ship Peaceful Current and all 3 million civilians aboard were successfully evacuated to safety. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, like a dam bursting, the chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted questions in dozens of languages, some standing on their seats to get his attention, others frantically operating their communication devices to relay the news to their home governments. Impossible! Admiral Korthak roared over the noise, his massive reptilian frame rising from the hegemony delegation. No fleet has ever achieved better than a Pyrrhic victory against the Void Hunters. What did the humans sacrifice for this victory? Zethkree felt his breathing apparatus flutter with nervous energy. This was the part that no one was going to believe. The human fleet suffered minimal casualties, he announced, waiting for the noise to die down. No ships were lost. Total crew casualties numbered 47 wounded, 12 seriously. No fatalities. This time the silence lasted longer. Ambassador Piplin was the first to find her voice. You're telling us, she said slowly, that 12 human ships destroyed 8 Void Hunter vessels and suffered no deaths in return? That is correct. How? Demanded Chancellor Mordun. Their adaptive technology should have neutralized any conventional weapons after the first few minutes of engagement. Zethkree activated his holographic display, showing the tactical data his scouts had gathered from the battle site. The humans employed purely kinetic weapons, relativistic projectiles with no energy signatures for the Void Hunters to adapt to. The alien bioarmor proved completely ineffective against simple, overwhelming kinetic force. Commander THYSS of the Avian Confederacy spread her wings in a gesture of amazement. Kinetic weapons? But the power requirements for relativistic acceleration are enormous. How did they generate that kind of energy output? According to our analysis, Zethkree replied, human ship design principles are fundamentally different from our own. Where we prioritize safety and efficiency, they prioritize raw power and destructive capability. Their reactor outputs are 3 to 4 times higher than comparable vessels from other species. Dr. Felnara of the Science Directorate stood up, her crystalline form shimmering with excitement. This explains their survival rate. The Void Hunters' primary advantage has always been their ability to adapt to and counter conventional energy weapons. They've never faced an opponent who relied primarily on kinetic force. There's more, Zethkree continued. During the engagement, the Void Hunters attempted to negotiate. According to the recorded transmissions, they claim that human biological patterns cannot be integrated into their assimilation systems. Humans may be naturally immune to their conversion technology. The implications hit the assembly like a shockwave. If humans couldn't be assimilated, if they were somehow incompatible with the Void Hunters' biotechnology, then they represented something unprecedented in galactic history. Where are the humans now? Admiral Korthak asked, his voice much quieter than before. Their fleet returned to human space immediately after the engagement, Zethkree replied. However, I have received a communication from their government. They are willing to meet with a council delegation to discuss the implications of their victory. Chancellor Mordun's crystalline form shifted to a deep blue color, indicating intense concentration. What are they asking for in return? Nothing, Zethkri said simply. They have made no demands. No requests for territory, resources, or political concessions. They simply wish to discuss how their capabilities might be used to help defend innocent civilians from future Void Hunter attacks. The chamber fell silent again as delegates absorbed this information. In galactic politics, no one ever offered military assistance without expecting something in return. The fact that the humans seemed genuinely motivated by humanitarian concerns was almost more shocking than their military victory. I propose, Zethkri continued, that we send a formal diplomatic mission to open negotiations with the human government. The implications of their capabilities extend far beyond this single engagement. Dr. Felnara was already pulling up her own holographic displays, showing star charts of known Void Hunter attack patterns. If humans can reliably defeat Void Hunter forces, we could potentially retake sectors that have been abandoned for centuries. Trade routes that have been closed for generations could be reopened. We could establish colonies in regions that are currently considered too dangerous for settlement, added Commander THYSS. The economic implications alone would be staggering. Admiral Korthak, however, looked troubled. What about the military implications? If humans can defeat Void Hunters this easily, what does that say about their capabilities against conventional galactic forces? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Everyone in the chamber had been thinking it, but no one had wanted to voice it. If humans could devastate ships that had proven invincible to every other military force in the galaxy, what would happen if humanity ever decided to become aggressive? I think, Zethkri said carefully, that question makes the case for diplomacy even stronger. We have an opportunity to establish positive relations with a species that possesses unprecedented military capabilities. It would be unwise to squander that opportunity. The vote to send a diplomatic mission was unanimous. 3 days later, the Galactic Council's most senior diplomats found themselves aboard the flagship Harmony, approaching the human system of Sol for the first time in over 20 years. The last official diplomatic contact had been the initial First Contact protocols, which had established basic trade agreements and territorial boundaries. This time, they were coming as supplicants. Ambassador Zethkri stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel, watching through the main viewport as they approached Earth. The planet looked deceptively peaceful from orbit, its blue and white surface giving no hint of the deadly world that lay beneath those clouds. Preliminary scans are complete, the ship's science officer reported. The planet's surface gravity is 30% higher than standard. Atmospheric composition includes elevated levels of oxygen, which would be toxic to most species in large quantities. Natural radiation levels are 3 times what we consider safe for extended exposure. And people live there voluntarily? Asked Ambassador Piplin, her small form shuddering with revulsion. 3 billion of them, the science officer confirmed. And, according to our intelligence reports, they consider it a garden world compared to some of the planets they've colonized. Zethkri tried to imagine what kind of environment could be worse than Earth, and failed. Human colonies included worlds with crushing gravity, toxic atmospheres, and radiation levels that would kill most galactic species within hours. The fact that humans not only survived on such worlds but thrived on them spoke to their incredible biological resilience. Incoming transmission from Earth Defense Command, the communications officer announced. A human face appeared on the main screen. Zethkri recognized Admiral Chun from their previous conversation, though she looked different in the formal uniform of her service. More intimidating, somehow. Ambassador Zethkri, Chun said, inclining her head slightly in what humans considered a respectful greeting. Welcome to the Sol System. I trust your journey was comfortable. Indeed it was, Admiral, Zethkri replied. Thank you for agreeing to meet with our delegation. The pleasure is ours, Chun said, though her expression remained professionally neutral. I should inform you that President Martinez will be conducting the formal negotiations personally. This situation has attracted considerable attention from our leadership. The diplomatic vessel was escorted to a space station orbiting Earth, a massive construct that served as both a military command center and civilian spaceport. As they docked, Zethkri noted the heavy presence of human military vessels in the area. The ships looked even more intimidating up close, their angular designs and oversized weapon arrays making them appear more like flying fortresses than traditional spacecraft. The human delegation that greeted them was smaller than expected, just President Martinez, Admiral Chun, and a few senior staff members. No massive entourage, no ceremonial guards, no obvious displays of power or wealth. It was surprisingly understated for such an important meeting. President Martinez was a middle-aged human female with graying hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She greeted each member of the council delegation personally, demonstrating a remarkable knowledge of their species' customs and protocols. "Gentle beings," she said as they gathered in a conference room overlooking Earth, "I understand you have some questions about our recent engagement with Void Hunter forces." "Indeed we do," Zethkri replied. "Your fleet's performance was unprecedented. We are hoping to understand how this victory might change our approach to defending civilian populations from future attacks." President Martinez nodded thoughtfully. "Before we discuss strategy, I think it's important that you understand our perspective on this situation." She gestured to Admiral Chun, who activated a holographic display showing the battle data. "From our point of view," Chun began, "this wasn't a major military engagement. 15 ships attacking unarmed refugees is what we would classify as a police action, not warfare. Our response was proportional to the threat level." Ambassador Piplin's breathing apparatus fluttered with surprise. "You consider destroying 8 Void Hunter vessels to be a proportional response to a police action?" "The safety of 3 million civilians was at stake," President Martinez replied simply. "In human military doctrine, there is no force too great when innocent lives are threatened." Dr. Felnara leaned forward in her seat. "President Martinez, our analysis suggests that your fleet could potentially engage much larger Void Hunter forces. How large a threat could you realistically counter?" The human president exchanged glances with her admiral before answering. "That depends on several factors. The size of their fleet, the tactical situation, the presence of civilian targets. But if you're asking whether we could defend galactic territory from Void Hunter incursions, the answer is yes, under the right circumstances." "What circumstances?" Chancellor Mordun asked, his crystalline form pulsing with cautious hope. "We would need formal authorization from the Galactic Council," President Martinez replied. "Clear rules of engagement, defined territorial boundaries, and assurance that we're acting in defense of innocent beings rather than pursuing conquest." Zethkri felt his heart skip a beat. "You would be willing to act as a galactic defense force?" "Within limits," Martinez said carefully. "We're not interested in becoming the galaxy's police force, but we are interested in protecting innocent beings from predators. If the Council is willing to work with us on establishing appropriate protocols, then, yes, we would consider expanding our defensive capabilities." The negotiations continued for 6 hours, covering everything from tactical coordination to political oversight. By the end of the session, the framework for an unprecedented alliance had taken shape. Humanity would establish joint defense protocols with the Galactic Council, providing protection against Void Hunter incursions in exchange for formal recognition as a galactic power and access to advanced Council technologies that could help them protect even more civilian populations. As the Council delegation prepared to return to their ship, Admiral Chun pulled Zethkri aside for a private conversation. "Ambassador," she said quietly, "there's something else you should know. Our intelligence suggests that what we fought wasn't a major Void Hunter force. Based on the quantum signatures from their ships, we believe their home territory contains thousands, possibly tens of thousands of vessels." Zethkri felt his breathing apparatus flutter with alarm. "You think they'll retaliate?" "I think they'll investigate," Chun replied. "They've never encountered effective resistance before. They're going to want to understand what they're dealing with." "And when they do?" Admiral Chun smiled. And once again Zethkri was reminded of humanity's predatory nature. "When they do, they're going to learn that there are consequences for threatening innocent beings in human-protected space." As the diplomatic vessel departed Earth, carrying news of the alliance that would reshape galactic civilization, none of the delegates realized that their movements were being watched by scouts whose technology was far more advanced than anything the Void Hunters possessed. The Deep Hunters had taken notice of the species that had humiliated their scouting forces, and They were very interested in testing the limits of human capabilities. The real war was about to begin. 6 months after the formation of the Human Council Defense Alliance, the first major test of the new partnership came from an unexpected direction. Admiral Sarah Chun stood in the command center of Starbase Prometheus, humanity's newest military installation positioned at the edge of Council space, watching her displays with growing concern. "Confirm those readings," she ordered her sensor operator for the third time in 10 minutes. "Confirmed, Admiral," Lieutenant Commander Park replied, his voice tight with disbelief. Long-range sensors are detecting a massive quantum disturbance in the outer rim. Size and pattern are consistent with a major fleet movement. But the scale is... He paused, checking his instruments again. "Ma'am, we're looking at quantum signatures from approximately 2,000 vessels." Chun felt her pulse quicken. The largest Void Hunter force ever recorded had numbered fewer than 50 ships. 2,000 vessels suggested something entirely different. "Deep Hunters," she said quietly, and the command center fell silent. The intelligence reports had been filtering in for months. Captured Void Hunter biotechnology had yielded disturbing information about their social structure. The creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries weren't an independent species. They were the equivalent of worker drones serving something much larger and more dangerous. The Deep Hunters were the true rulers of the Void Hunter Empire, ancient beings that commanded from massive hive ships deep in unexplored space. According to the fragmentary intelligence gathered from damaged Void Hunter neural networks, the Deep Hunters hadn't directly intervened in galactic affairs for over 1,000 years. Apparently, humanity's victory had changed that. "Ma'am," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving priority transmissions from the Galactic Council. Ambassador Zeth is requesting immediate consultation." "Put him through." Zeth image appeared on the main screen, and Chun could immediately see the fear in his 4 eyes. The usually composed diplomat looked as though he hadn't slept in days. "Admiral Chun," he said without preamble, "we need the human fleet. The Deep Hunters have emerged from their territory and are moving toward populated systems. Our combined intelligence estimates suggest a force larger than anything we've ever encountered." "How large?" Chun asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Conservative estimates put it at 2,000 ships," Zeth replied. "But, Admiral, these aren't the Void Hunter vessels we've seen before. They're orders of magnitude larger. Some of our scouts report individual ships the size of small moons." Chun studied the tactical displays surrounding her position. The human fleet had grown substantially in the months since the alliance was formed, but they could field perhaps 300 ships of the line. Against 2,000 Deep Hunter vessels, the mathematics were daunting. "What's their target?" she asked. "Unknown," Zeth admitted. "They're moving through the outer systems, but they haven't attacked any populated worlds yet. It's almost as if they're searching for something." Chun had a sinking feeling she knew what they were searching for. "Admiral, I think they're looking for us. The Void Hunters that escaped our engagement would have reported humanity's existence to their masters. The Deep Hunters want to see what kind of threat we represent. Can you stop them?" Zeth asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Chun looked around her command center, where her staff was already pulling up battle plans and fleet deployments. The question wasn't whether they could stop 2,000 Deep Hunter vessels. The question was whether they could make those vessels pay such a high price for their aggression that they would think twice about future attacks. "We can try," she said finally. "But, Zeth, you need to understand. If we engage a force that size, we're committed to total warfare. There won't be any half measures or limited engagements. Either we win decisively or we lose everything." "The Council understands," Zeth replied. "We've already begun evacuating civilian populations from the outer systems. Whatever you need, resources, intelligence, support vessels, it's yours. We'll need 48 hours to position our fleet," Chun said. "Can you guarantee us that much time? Our long-range scouts indicate that the Deep Hunter fleet is moving slowly, as if they're conducting some kind of detailed survey of each system they pass through. You should have your time." The transmission ended, leaving Chun staring at tactical displays that showed the impossible task ahead of her. 300 human ships against 2,000 Deep Hunter vessels, with the future of galactic civilization hanging in the balance. XO. She called to Commander Martinez, who had been listening to the entire conversation. Signal the fleet. All ships are to proceed immediately to Rally Point Omega. Full combat loadout. Maximum acceleration. Ma'am, Martinez replied. Should we request additional support from Earth Defense Command? Chen shook her head. There isn't time. By the time reinforcements could reach us, the deep hunters will be in populated systems. We go with what we have. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of preparations. The human fleet converged on Rally Point Omega, a strategic position near the edge of the Helix Nebula that offered both defensive advantages and multiple escape routes. Chen had chosen the location carefully. If her fleet was going to face impossible odds, she wanted to do it on terrain that maximized their tactical advantages. As the ships took their positions, Chen reviewed the intelligence reports one more time. The Deep Hunter vessels were unlike anything in their databases. Where the smaller Void Hunter ships were obviously biomechanical constructs, the Deep Hunter vessels appeared to be almost entirely organic. They moved through space like living creatures, their hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that suggested active neural networks spanning the entire ship. More disturbing was their size. The largest Deep Hunter vessels were over 50 kilometers long, with organic weapon arrays that defied conventional understanding of military engineering. According to the scouts, these ships didn't simply carry weapons. They were weapons, with every part of their structure designed to project various forms of biological warfare across interstellar distances. Admiral, her tactical officer announced, long-range sensors are detecting the Deep Hunter fleet. They're emerging from the nebula's edge, approximately 2,000 kilometers from our position. Chen watched her displays as the enemy force began to appear. Even prepared for what she was going to see, the reality was overwhelming. The Deep Hunter ships moved in perfect coordination, like a school of massive space-dwelling creatures responding to some collective intelligence. The lead vessels were the size of terrestrial cities, their organic hulls covered in what appeared to be sensory organs and weapon clusters. Behind them came smaller ships that were still larger than human dreadnoughts, and bringing up the rear was something that defied easy categorization. A vessel so large that it registered on sensors as a small planetoid, its surface covered with structures that might have been cities or weapon installations. My God, someone whispered on the command channel. Chen opened a fleet-wide communication channel. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. I know what you're seeing looks impossible. I know the odds seem overwhelming. But I want you to remember something. 6 months ago, the galaxy considered 15 Void Hunter ships to be an unstoppable force. We proved them wrong. She paused, watching as the Deep Hunter fleet continued its approach. These creatures have ruled through fear for over 1,000 years. They've never faced real resistance because no one has ever been willing to fight them properly. Today, we show them that their reign of terror is over. The response from her fleet was immediate and unanimous. Aye, Admiral. Ready for action. The Deep Hunters opened communication first, their transmission carrying the same multi-harmonic voice pattern that characterized their smaller cousins, but amplified to an almost overwhelming degree. Deathworld predators, the voice said, and Chun could hear what sounded like thousands of beings speaking in unison. You have interfered with our domain. You have destroyed our servants. You will be analyzed and integrated into our collective. This is Admiral Sarah Chun of the Terran Defense Fleet, she replied. You are threatening innocent civilian populations. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. The laughter that came back was unlike anything Chun had ever heard. It was the sound of a collective intelligence that found the concept of resistance genuinely amusing. We are the Deep Hunters, they replied. We have consumed civilizations across 1,000 worlds. We have integrated the knowledge of 10,000 species. You will provide us with new biological patterns to improve our efficiency. Counteroffer, Chen said, her voice taking on the hard edge that her crew had learned to recognize as a very bad sign. You leave our space immediately, or we demonstrate why predators should fear other predators. What happened next would be debated by military historians for generations. Instead of waiting for the Deep Hunter response, instead of allowing them to dictate the terms of engagement, Admiral Chun gave an order that would echo through galactic history. All ships, open fire. Show them what happens when you threaten our neighbors. The human fleet unleashed everything they had. 300 ships firing simultaneously created a light show visible across several star systems. Kinetic projectiles accelerated to near-light speed, plasma bolts hot enough to vaporize asteroids. And something new. Experimental weapons that human scientists had developed specifically for dealing with large organic targets. The Deep Hunter vessels responded exactly as predicted. Their bioarmor began adapting to the energy weapons within seconds, developing resistance to plasma bombardment and deflecting most directed energy attacks. But the kinetic weapons were a different story. The first salvo of relativistic projectiles struck the lead Deep Hunter vessels with the force of nuclear explosions. The organic hulls, designed to absorb and adapt to energy-based attacks, proved completely vulnerable to simple kinetic impact. Massive wounds opened in the alien ships, venting atmosphere and biological fluids into space. The Deep Hunter's response was immediate and terrifying. The largest vessels began projecting some form of biological warfare that turned empty space itself toxic, creating fields of corrupted quantum foam that would dissolve any organic matter they contacted. But human ships weren't primarily organic. They were machines operated by beings who had learned to survive in environments hostile to all life. All ships, Chun ordered, implement Protocol 7. Maximum kinetic bombardment, full protective measures against biological contamination. The battle became a brutal slugging match between two completely different approaches to warfare. The Deep Hunters attempted to corrupt, absorb, and convert their enemies, while the humans simply tried to smash them into component atoms. For the first time in their collective memory, the Deep Hunters found their advantages neutralized. Their adaptive technology was useless against kinetic weapons, their biowarfare couldn't affect mechanical systems, and their superior numbers meant nothing when their targets refused to be intimidated. The engagement lasted for 6 hours. When it ended, the Deep Hunter fleet had been reduced to fewer than 800 vessels, while the human fleet had lost 91 ships. By any conventional standard, it should have been considered a defeat for humanity. But the Deep Hunters were retreating. As Chun watched the alien fleet withdraw toward deep space, she realized that they had accomplished something unprecedented. For the first time in recorded galactic history, someone had forced the Deep Hunters to acknowledge that they could lose. "Admiral," her communications officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the Deep Hunter fleet. Let's hear it." The voice was different this time. Fewer harmonics, suggesting that fewer individuals were speaking simultaneously. More importantly, it carried something that Chun had never heard in any Void Hunter communication before. "Respect. Deathworld predators," they said. "You have proven to be more formidable than anticipated. We will withdraw from this sector and consider new strategies for dealing with your species." "Understood," Chun replied. "And Deep Hunters? The next time you threaten innocent civilians in our protective zone, we'll demonstrate what happens when humans stop holding back." As the transmission ended, Chun realized that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. The Deep Hunters had ruled through the assumption that nothing could challenge their supremacy. That assumption was now broken. Humanity had proven that predators could be prey, that the apex could be toppled, and that sometimes the best defense was an overwhelming offense. The refugees in council space were safe. The trade routes would remain open. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the galaxy had hoped that the darkness could be held back. But Chun knew this wasn't the end. The Deep Hunters would adapt, would develop new strategies, would return with different tactics. When they did, humanity would be ready. After all, humans had a saying about such situations: "If you come at the king, you better not miss." The Deep Hunters had missed. And now the entire galaxy knew that even the darkness itself could bleed.